Chances are, at some point in your life, you or a family member will be prescribed a narcotic pain reliever, Vicodin, Oxycontin, Percocet, etc., by a physician or dentist. Back in 2010, enough prescription pain medications were prescribed to medicate every American adult around the clock for a month. Yet many don't understand, or they underestimate, the addictive nature of these medications, especially if abused. Prescription drug abuse is the fastest growing drug problem facing our nation today. In 2020, among people aged 12 or older, 9.5 million people misused opioids in the form of heroin or prescription pain relievers. Of those 9.5 million people, 9.3 million of them misuse prescription pain relievers. Unfortunately, today's drug addiction is no longer someone else's problem. With millions currently abusing prescription pain medications and thousands more moving on to heroin, be aware that the sad reality is it will probably touch all of us sooner or later. The following stories are chapters of people's lives shared to create awareness, channel hope, and change lives. These are real stories from real people, from those who have lost someone to those who have saved someone or tried. These stories are a wake-up call for us all.
My name is Lisa Bashline, and 3 years ago, my family and I lost my oldest son, Eric. He was just 24, and he had struggled for years with substance use disorder. Started out when he was just in middle school, believe it or not. I think he started using prescription drugs that he got from kids at school, and it really spiraled into so much more than we could have ever imagined. By the time he was in high school, we searched for places to get him help. They're so glaringly few for kids that age, and maybe he was 16 and he quit high school. He moved out of the house shortly after that, and things really went downhill quickly when he got to be about 18. He was using heroin and meth, and would come in and out of our lives, maybe to stay with us for brief periods of time. And we didn't know what to do as a family. It was horrible. The anger and guilt and fear, constant fear of how he was doing. And he did go to rehab multiple times, which is surprisingly hard on the human body. Some things you don't realize how difficult it is to go repeatedly through detox and withdrawals, how fragile the body becomes after being revived multiple times with naloxone and Narcan and chest compressions. All those things do take a toll on your body. And 3 years ago, he did succumb to an overdose. And it's difficult. And we miss him so much. He was a great, smart, talented, wonderful young man. And I just want people to know that it can happen to you. And he didn't want this. He didn't want that to be the end. He watched multiple friends overdose and die, and he knew that that was not only a possibility, but a likelihood if things kept going the way that they were with him. We all knew that. And I think just you hope, constantly have that hope that next time, that this time will be the time when he can find the strength and get through it. And so many people do, and that's what is so hopeful. So many people do, and I meet people every day who have and are doing so well, and it brings me hope on a daily basis. And I decided that what I needed to do was try and help other people, other families like ours that didn't know where to turn, didn't have anyone to talk to, didn't know how to behave, didn't know how to react, didn't know what to do that was supportive. And so I got involved with Families Against Narcotics and have recently become a family coach, which is it's just amazing that I am going to be able to help provide information and support for families that are just like us, people who find themselves in the middle of something, drowning, just trying to stay afloat, not knowing what to do. And I hope that I can help provide some support that we didn't receive, and do some good for Eric, and so his death isn't in vain. As hard as it is, that brings me some comfort, and it makes me feel closer to him every day. Don't be afraid to reach out and try to get help anywhere you can for your child and for yourself. It's so important that you take care of yourself, and that way you are better equipped to help your child or your loved one. And there are so many places available now to reach out to. FAN is one of many, and I encourage that. Don't be afraid of the stigma or embarrassment or guilt. Push past that. That does not matter. And part of the importance is you telling your story, reaching out so you can help others and yourself.
So my name is Kimber Debelak, and I'm the director here at Recovery Pathways, which is an outpatient treatment facility for both substance use disorder and mental health issues. And I do it because I love it. I also do it because I have a passion for this, and I believe that people need second chances, and lots of us just need assistance along the way of life's journey, which is never exactly how we predict it to be. And so what we aim to do here is to try to help people learn the skills, enable them to reunite with families and sort of recover at their own pace and return to society a healthier individual. And we do it because we can see change. And one of the things we believe is it's about progress, not perfection, and we all have different paces along the way. So we want to support everybody's progress as they work towards a healthier lifestyle for themselves. So I think when we talk about the opiate epidemic, everyone thinks that it's someplace else and it's someone else. And I would encourage you all to think that Substance use, especially opiates, looks just like you and me in the mirror. It is everybody affected by this. It affects families, it affects teens, it affects grandmas and grandpas. It looks really normal, but it's so much more prevalent than we think. And I believe some of the statistics say that if you got a family of 4, at least 1 out of the 4 of you is going to be affected. So if you think about that, just at your dinner table, there's someone that's going to struggle with this at some point in their life. So I think that we need to destigmatize it. We need to acknowledge that it exists. We need to talk about it freely and openly and honestly. We need to say that there are some things that must change. I always am a believer that this is not a one-path problem, so it's a community problem, it's a family problem, it's not just an individual issue, so it's going to take all of those other people to help with the response to it. So I think definitely a conversation has to happen. We have to acknowledge that it exists. It's right here in front of you, and you have to be brave enough to talk about it. You have to be brave enough to confront it. And only if we can do that can we actually make some changes. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. I also think there's different perception from when I grew up about substance use and how some of that is endorsed these days, and it's romanticized, and it's on television, and it's YouTube, and it's all of those places that you can see it being a part of a different culture, a different lifestyle that we have to alter reality. And I think that we have to discuss that life involves pain, because without pain you don't know the peace and the joy. So that we have to begin to acknowledge that life is about the ups and downs, and it's how we cope with them and how we surround ourselves with people who love us through those ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And I think that conversation has to happen. It has to happen at churches. It has to happen at the dinner table. It has to happen with our parents. Even at my age, with my adult parents, both directions there. So I really think we've got to begin to realize that this affects all of us at every level, younger than you think it does, older than you imagine it does, and be willing to have that conversation. It's uncomfortable in the same way that it's uncomfortable to talk to your kids about sex. It's an awkward conversation to have, but somehow as parents, we've all gone through the birds and bees conversation, so we have to figure out what's the uncomfortable thing in ourselves that we don't want to talk about it. And I guess there's a phrase, caring enough to confront. If you care enough to confront, then you'll be willing to have that awkward conversation. Once we've acknowledged it, then we have to do something about it. It's sort of one of those things, if you don't participate in the solution, then you become part of the problem. And I think it's important for us to do whatever our part can be, wherever we are, being willing to bring that up, destigmatizing it, making sure that it's an okay thing to talk about, that if someone does say that there's a problem, we don't just have awkward silence. We say, well, I'm not sure what the appropriate answer is or what I can do, but I know and I care, and let's figure out some things together. There's lots of different options for folks, but again, it's about who are we talking to? Are we talking on an individual basis? Then we can say, well, let's go get some help together. Let's call someone who might know more about this. Let's just not let it go. Let's continue to process towards getting a solution to this. If it's in a system setting, like at a school or a church, there has to be some conversations there too, and a safe place for someone to go if they do need some help. So I think that there's many layers of the response, but the first thing is we can no longer ignore. We have to stand up and say, and we have to be willing to look for different options, other options than what the status quo has been, which is pretend it doesn't exist.
My name is Douglas Chapman. I'm a retired sergeant with Shiawassee County Sheriff's Office. Defy, that is Drug Education for Youth. Back in 2016, I became involved in the Shiawassee County Drug Court. That program is overseen by Judge Matthew Stewart, who is our circuit court judge here in Shiawassee County. I got involved in drug court because I had a feeling that my stepdaughter had the drug addiction. It began slowly. I believe it started with the use of Vicodin for pain, or perhaps other drugs to help with weight loss, stuff of that nature. But it continued to go downhill. At no point did I ever see any evidence that she was using these drugs, but I was suspect of it. She had a boyfriend who had gotten into a lot of trouble, and I was able to find out that because of his trouble was that of a heroin addiction. So when I became involved in drug court, I wanted to know from the participants, the people that are in recovery, what do I look for? There was one participant that we had that reminded me of my stepdaughter. She looked a lot like her. She was about the same age, or close to, and she started giving me a lot of information on what to look for. At one point, I told her that my best friend's daughter was suspected of a heroin overdose because I was embarrassed to say that it was my stepdaughter. So as time went on, I noticed her addiction getting greater. We did find evidence that she was using in her bedroom. We found evidence in a garbage bag, and I found all the components that go with heroin use. So after learning that, I continued working harder, trying to figure out what we could do as parents, and we tried everything. We didn't have places like we have available now to help with the addiction. We would send her to the hospital because she was a threat to herself. She wouldn't be in the hospital long enough to complete the paperwork, and she was back out. She would simply tell the nurses and doctors what they wanted to hear: I don't have a problem. I believe she never thought she had a problem whatsoever. October 30th of 2016, we lost my stepdaughter to, in fact, a heroin overdose. She died with a needle in her arm. After going through that tragedy, I made it my calling that I would do everything I could to get the awareness out to the public and try to do something to help families and children from what I have learned. I also made it my duty to teach law enforcement officers that these people are not just heroin addicts. They are good people. They make one bad choice. Number one is the choice of use. Number two is the addiction. This stuff is so powerful, it takes over your mind, soul, your entire life immediately with just one dose. So that's when I decided, along with all my friends that are involved in the drug court and the prosecutor and every professional person that I know, to go into the schools to help educate kids and their parents. So we started the Defy Program. We were very successful. We would talk for an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half, and it was very receptive. The kids really paid attention, and I believe that it was really working. Well, then COVID hit us, and we were unable to get into the schools, and it kind of went on the wayside. However, I then decided to contact Families Against Narcotics, have them come to our county, at which point we have now a Shiawassee fan chapter here. I am the president of FAN, and we have a full team of individuals to help parents, help those with the addiction problem, to be there to help them in any way we can. What I want to get out there is teach your kids. If they are out going to a party and you think it's no big deal, do not ingest something you have not seen. Do not leave your drink if you were to have a drink. And please do not smoke marijuana or a vape if you don't know where it came from. People are using these items to addict our children. They are placing fentanyl into these different things, such as marijuana. They're partying with our kids, girls and boys, and they are getting our children addicted, and that's where human trafficking begins. First time is a choice. Second time is addiction, and it doesn't go away. Does she look like a heroin addict?
So my name is Whitney Benjamin, and I am a clinical supervisor and a therapist at Recovery Pathways. I have been working in the outpatient field of substance use disorder since 2016. I guess part of the reason that I do what I do is I'm in recovery, and I've been in recovery for 13 years. My best friend passed away from an opioid overdose, and I have a significant history of friends and family who struggle with the disease of addiction, alcoholism, as well as drug addiction. I think probably what stands out to me, and part of the reason, that my journey is important, is that understanding that someone might not get it the first time, and they might not necessarily get it the 12th time, but it might be that 15th time or that 20th time. So even for the people who might drop out of treatment or discharge or be resistant to change, or maybe not be ready to give up a certain substance, continuing to just treat them with kindness and compassion, because you never know when that light switch is going to flip on, and you never know when they're going to kind of move from I don't want to give up using to I'm ready to quit. So I think that's kind of how my own personal journey has helped me within my work field too. I think part of it is just having conversation, because if they're not admitting that a drug or alcohol is the issue, maybe if it's youth, they can see that their grades are failing in school. If it's an adult, maybe they can see they've lost 4 jobs over the last 5 years. So having just a non-judgmental conversation about kind of what's going on in their life, and what are some of the barriers to what their short-term and long-term goals are, and not avoiding talking about how the substance is impacting that, but if they're not able to kind of make that, association or turning point change on their own, just having the conversation of what's, not going right in their life, and how are some of the areas they would like to change, and what are some of the ways that, continuing using or being involved in, what they're involved in right now are going to prevent, those things from changing. The one thing that I would tell parents to be aware of is that drugs are everywhere, whether it is within the schools, within households, whether it's, your friends' parents or your kids' friends that are using, but just kind of educate yourself on what are drugs and what is the reality of what drugs can do to youth, as well as having those honest conversations with kids. I think a lot of times we go from the generation of dare kids who use drugs and you're gonna die immediately, and that generation of kids then found out that if I smoked weed or I drank and I didn't die, it kind of led to a lot of other substances. And by the time we were utilizing, heroin or an alcoholic, then we could see the problem. But because the DARE program essentially kind of taught a lot of that, use something and you'll die, without the middle steps of obviously using drugs can cause euphoria. It does make you feel good. It takes away your anxiety and your depression. It makes you feel more energetic and outgoing. So I think for parents, I would say educate yourselves on what, some of the effects are for, drugs, and also having kids or parents have those conversations with kids in terms of, these are drugs, this is, drug abuse, this is substance use disorder, this is, alcohol use disorder, this runs in the family, I've struggled with this, so that kids are aware of, what could possibly be some barriers in the future, or if, they're using substances or their friends are using substances, what some of the consequences could be. For parents, understanding like generational like substance use disorder, I mean, whether their parents were alcoholics and addicts, and then like whether their kids could, you know, potentially be, you know, alcoholics or addicts or have that, you know, trait, because not only is it the environment or the kids or the associations, but, you know, part of intergenerational addiction kind of comes down. So like being able to say like, you know, your grandpa was an alcoholic, I was an alcoholic, like there's a potential that if you choose to drink, like you could also struggle with this, and this is really what it means. You know, you could lose your kids, your house, your money, your, you know, everything that you want to work towards. That might not necessarily prevent, you know, a teen or an early adult from picking up and drinking, but at least it would give that information to kind of like set the groundwork of like where, you know, family came from and what you risk. And then if you do find yourself in head over heels and you're struggling with alcoholism, then you know I can go to my mom, I know I can go to my grandpa, I can go to my dad, I can get help. There won't be that shame and that stigma. There's not a lot of conversations being had. There's not a lot of, you know, kids who are saying, yeah, I'm smoking weed and I don't want to quit and I don't really, you know what to do. No parent, grandparent wants their kid to drink or smoke weed or sneak out or, you know, make bad decisions, but, you know, it happens. But if we just like turn our head that like those aren't our kids and those people don't live in our communities, then we kind of miss an opportunity to educate, inform, support, help people shift on that spectrum of like, I don't want to change and quit using, to like, I'm just a person who's struggling. Okay, now I want to get better and I don't want to do this anymore.
Okay, so I'm Linda Davis. I'm the Executive Director of Families Against Narcotics. I have been working in this field for about 15 years now. I got involved back when I was a sitting judge. I saw an onslaught of young people that were coming into my courtroom that had never been in trouble before and were all of a sudden being hooked to heroin and opiates through pain medications. It was alarming. I lived next door to a police officer that we talked over the fence all the time, and she was constantly telling me about the number of overdoses of young people in our community that she was responding to. We had two 17-year-old young men who died back to back within a 30-day period of time of one another of a heroin overdose, which is something that we had never seen in our community. And then I found out right before my daughter's senior year that she too was addicted to heroin. She had had a knee surgery in the summer, was a straight-A student, an athlete, and the next 3 years of our lives were a battle to save hers. So FAN was created by my next door neighbor who was the police officer. She just decided to get a group of people together to start talking about this, and we really didn't know who would show up or how that would go, but about 100 people, believe it or not, showed up. And this was 15 years ago, before it was politically popular to talk about this topic. And a lot of angry parents, a lot of young people who had gotten addicted because of sports injuries were prescribed narcotic medication that took them down a pathway that they never thought that they would end up in. And we just started talking, and there was so much anger in that room. And by the end of it, one of our young people in recovery said, we're really not going to make progress if we just keep blaming people. We need to come up with some real solutions. So we started just educating in the community as a beginning point for what we were doing. And as you can see behind me, the wall of different programming that we now do. We really assist people that are suffering from substance use problems and their family to access help. It was one of the things I found tremendously difficult when my daughter went through this. It is not an easy system, and then if you take somebody whose brain has been altered by the drugs or alcohol that they're using, it's almost impossible for them to know how to access treatment. So we do the heavy lifting for them and walk them through it. We are a referral system to help you get into recovery, and we leave nobody behind, and there's no judgment. It doesn't matter if you are still in active use. We want to make sure that you are living the healthiest lifestyle you can for the choices you're making at any moment in your life. But our ultimate goal is obviously, if you are seeking treatment, is to help you access that treatment. We all bear a lot of stigma around addiction. We picture what TV has taught us addiction looks like. It's always the worst of the worst when we see it, with people laying in gutters and on streets with needles stuck in their arms. And the truth of the matter is, this is a disease. And it can start very innocently by just taking a prescribed medication. People's bodies like that feeling. And we think it's safe because it's been prescribed by doctors oftentimes. And getting high and experimenting with substances, drinking, goes all the way back to the caveman day where they smoked the pipe. And in my generation, it was drinking, and it became marijuana, and then it became cocaine. But now the drugs are so potent and so powerful, and they're being laced with deadly substances like fentanyl, that experimenting with that level of drug use is taking people's lives down a path that they never wanted to go in. What's important to know is that this is a disease that is not a choice. Drug use may be a choice the first time you do it, but it alters your body and your mind. It changes brain chemistry. And it's not so easy to just say, well, why can't they just stop? Without intervention and without help, most people cannot stop using these very potent substances that are on the street today. I just think parents need to stop being naive. If you read any article in the newspaper right now, if you watch any television show, you see that this is happening to very good families. None of us are bulletproof. I am the last person on earth that ever thought would be battling this with my family. We went to church, we had Sunday dinners together, we talked, we were a close-knit family. So if you think all of those things are insulating you against this, you're wrong. It's really important that you educate yourself, understand what is being prescribed to your children, talk to your children, and just really be aware of this is really trending throughout the United States, and we are actually being targeted by cartels, and our young people are vulnerable. So going away to college, anything like that where people may be trying to push a pill on you to stay awake, not fall asleep, being able to study longer, all of those can lead down that pathway of an addiction that you never wanted to have in your life. And nobody ever wakes up and says, you know what I want to do with my life? I want to be addicted to drugs or alcohol. It happens over time. It's done very innocently in the very beginning, just people wanting to feel good. I mean, we live in a world that's so negative. We're just bombarded with it. When you look at the suicide rates amongst young people, we don't give a lot of things for young people to be happy about nowadays. You turn on the news and it's a lot of my friends have gotten so they say they don't even watch it any longer. It's just too depressing, and yet we expect young people to process all of that. And what they're doing, unfortunately, is turning to drugs and alcohol as an escape from it all.
My name is Trooper Amy Belanger with the Michigan State Police. So I'm a trooper right now, working the road, but my previous experience is working with adults and children that have drug abuse addictions and things like that, as well as human trafficking. So I have expertise in all the realms of everything, but more specifically as far as the drug abuse goes. So working the road, taking 911 calls, responding to accidents, responding to overdoses, those types of things is almost a daily occurrence. Most recently, I had a lady driver who had overdosed on drugs. She had her 2-year-old son in the back seat in his car seat, and she ended up running off the road and ended up in a ditch, a fairly steep ditch to where the vehicle was pinned up against the trees on the other side of the ditch. And she was unconscious at the wheel. Her 2-year-old son was crying and panicking, obviously not knowing what was going on with mom. So we were able to remove him out of the vehicle, and she was, however, stuck in the vehicle due to the position of her door against the trees and whatnot in the ditch. So we had to get fire on scene. We had to take 2 to 3 guys to get her out of the vehicle, and she was Narcaned. And once she was Narcaned, after a few minutes went by, she finally became conscious again and alert, and was unaware that she had put her life in danger. She had put her 2-year-old son's life in danger over drugs. So it is a daily occurrence being a police officer and having to deal with these types of situations, and especially when there's a 2-year-old child that's in the vehicle. So now CPS is involved in addition to her driving while under the influence of drugs. So there's all kinds of repercussions that follow that type of situation as well. The Michigan State Police actually has a program. It's called the Angel Program. We've partnered with several police departments throughout the state, which include Owasso Police Department. So with that program, if you have a drug addiction, then we are asking you to come forward when you're comfortable, when you're ready, and you can come into any of our police posts. You can come to the Owasso Police Department, and basically that's when you say you need help and you recognize that you need help. So you can come and you can request our assistance. We'll partner you up with one of our trained Angel partners, which is a civilian that has been trained in basically how to recognize drugs and what we need them to do as far as this program, and transport you to a rehab facility where it doesn't matter if you have insurance or you don't have insurance, we will get you there and we will get you the help that you need. So we have a great program that is for anybody that needs that help and is ready for that help.
First, I want to share with you. Well, this is my son, Ryan. He died in 2006 from a drug overdose. This is his son, Jacob, and he was a good daddy. This is a picture of them kissing with the Oreo cookie. I had 3 different pictures of the Oreo cookie kiss. I made this book of Ryan. I call it. They have here, it's called I'm Still a Person. It's a stigma book. 16 years ago, this was my stigma book. And they didn't call it stigma, they called it judgment. People judged.
Yeah.
And so when I went back to work, I went and asked my administrator, because he died on Labor Day weekend, and the funeral was only one day. And I wanted them to know Ryan. I wanted them to know his heart. I wanted them to know how he loved his family, how he loved his son, how he loved his mom, because he loved his mom. Just wanted to share his life with people, because people do judge and they don't understand the person behind the struggle. When Ryan passed away, I was on my way to Meyer in town. And there was a sign, this was back in 2006, there was a sign on somebody's front lawn that said, "Welcome home, Dad." He was coming home from Iraq. And it said, "Welcome home, Dad." And as I passed, I honked the horn. And when I honked the horn, my emotion just came over me to think that Jacob didn't get to have his daddy come home. He fought a different battle. He didn't go to Iraq. He fought his battle in Shiawassee County. My son had in his book, it talked about his smile. He hid behind that smile, and he had a lot of pain. A lot of pain in his heart. And we self-medicate. He ended up dying of overdose of fentanyl. We got a phone call August 31st, 2006 from the hospital saying that our son was on life support and that we needed to get to the hospital. And when we got there, We didn't know, but Ryan chose to be a donor. And that was the compassion of my son. And when we went to go sign the papers for our son to be a donor, I remember they wanted our signature, and I signed it Mom. That was Mom. Didn't sign it Diane Johnson, but I signed it Mom. And that was his heart. I said he gave away his tender heart. He gave away his tender heart. I always would introduce, this is my Jacob. You know, he's my joy. I see his daddy in his face, in his eyes. He looks a lot like his daddy. But you know, when you tell a 5-year-old that your daddy died, how difficult, how painful that was. But you know, as a 5-year-old, this little boy taught me so much. He taught me, he had wisdom, childlike wisdom. I remember him telling me, Mama, hold me. He says, my heart feels like 1,000,000 pounds and I'm tired. And I thought, that's what grief feels like. You're just so tired and your heart is so heavy. My son died of a prescription drug, fentanyl, back in 2006 that was sold on the streets. Now they have fentanyl, rainbow fentanyl. I mean, it looks like sweet tarts. How are we going to save our children? We need to know. We need to educate ourselves. When I retired, I told myself I had to retire. I told myself I'm 65 years old and I need to retire because I'm getting older and I need to do this. I need to speak out. I need to be Brian's voice. I need to be his voice and to be able to speak and try to let them know that, I mean, there's so many resources out there today compared to what it was when my son was in the battlefield. There's Families Against Narcotics, there's peer recovery coaches, there's family recovery coaches, there's just, that's one of them. It's just Families Against Narcotics. There's so many people rising up. People are rising up right now to help save our kids. We've got to do something. We really need to come together as a community to help save our children, to educate our children, not to say no. Back then they used to have the DARE program. It would say no to drugs. We need to know about drugs. They need to know. We're not an island. We can't do it by ourselves. We need each other. So don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Keep hoping. You keep praying and you keep loving your kids. You keep loving them.
My name is Amanda Reynolds, and I'm a clinical therapist at Recovery Pathways here in Shiawassee County. We have multiple different locations, but I primarily work here. I started off as an intern. I was really young, and I was pretty naive to what substance use was, but I knew I was really passionate about helping people. Once I got into working here and interning here, I slowly started to realize how much of an epidemic we were in and just the impact that not just this county but every county has on an opioid crisis, methamphetamine crisis, alcohol crisis, just substance use in general. I quickly started to realize that it's not just this one-way track for recovery, and there's not one person, gender, age, race that defines someone who would be considered an addict or dependent on a substance. My eyes were really open to what all of this is about, and the time that I was actually in my internship, one of my best friends from high school had died. He was drinking behind the wheel. And so when all of that kind of happened at the same time, I started to have this really big passion. And I started to realize that people needed to learn more, and I needed to learn more about it. So I started getting as much training as I could, as much education as I could, and I started working with clients. Now, 4 years later, I'm a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor. I work anywhere from teenagers with a substance use disorder all the way to older adults with a substance use disorder. And my passion is to really talk to people about how this is a medical disease. We have so much research now that shows us the way that drugs and alcohol impact the different chemicals within our brain. We have brain studies that show us the brain of someone who is clean and the brain of someone who's actively using, and how that changes the way that we think, the way that we behave. And so I want people to learn more about that, and I want there to be less stigma surrounding it. I think that I just really love people to understand that it's not based off of I made one bad choice and now I'm an addict. It is a whole slew of things that happen, and our brain is really impacted heavily by that. And what people in recovery need is support. They need to realize that they're not alone, and they need to realize that they can learn tools, and that's what I do. I am a part of, teaching them different coping mechanisms for anxiety, for depression. Maybe they went through trauma. Maybe they had the perfect childhood, but were around the wrong people at the right time and it happened. And so it's my job to kind of help them through that, and I love to get them connected with resources and just being connected with different people. So I'm really passionate about what I do, but I know for me, I was really naive to what it even was. And so now that I've done the research, I realize how necessary it is for parents, children, families, just anybody to really get a grasp for what substance use disorder really means. I think one of the biggest things that I would tell parents is to educate yourself, because a lot of times children, or whatever that age frame might be, I have clients who are full adults and they still struggle with connecting with their parents about this. I'd want parents to understand that there is so much shame and guilt connected to substance use, and a lot of times kids won't realize that it's a disorder until it gets to the point where it almost feels like it's too late, or the legal system gets involved, the juvenile department gets involved, school gets involved. There are behaviors that we can look for, but instead of shaming the children, the important thing is to have open conversations about it, and also to just be aware of some of those symptoms. If we have kids who are starting to slack off in school, they normally wouldn't, or they're in their rooms and they're isolating a lot more. If they're being very cautious about things that they're putting into their, bags and what is in their vehicle, being aware of those things, but having helpful, healthy conversations about it, and also understanding it's not based off of whether a child or a kid is a bad kid or a good kid. I have people that come in here, and once the parent leaves the room, the child gets really open and honest, and what they really are looking for is connection. They want someone to say, I'm here for you. What can we do to help you? How can we support you? Instead of what you're doing is wrong. Why are you doing this? There is something wrong with you. We want to remove that stigma that something is wrong with someone if they have a mental health condition or if they have a substance use disorder. And a big thing I'd want to say to parents too is that it is everywhere. Whether you think that your kid is in a healthy environment or maybe they're not in the healthiest environment, it doesn't matter where they're at. If they are at a school, if they are going to different public events, we can have access to any medications anywhere, any substances anywhere. I have resources and learn knowledge that people are getting, marijuana, vape, meth off of Snapchat, off of different social media apps. So even if it's not happening within our school system, it's probably happening in our community. It's probably happening online too. So be aware, be alert, but be open. Be open to learn more and understand more.
The court calls People v. Pearson.
Sir, is there anything you'd like to say before the court imposes a sentence for your drug and your theft crimes? son, it could be your daughter, it could be a close friend, it could be anyone near and dear to you. But the question is, how did this happen? And then if it does, what should you do? Well, my name is Judge Max Stewart, and I'd like to talk to you about that. Then before we get to the criminal sentencing, I think we have to identify the offending drugs that contributes to a substance use or an opioid use disorder. And those opioid drugs include Vicodin, Oxycontin, morphine, heroin, and probably the biggest offender, fentanyl. And this is what these drugs do to you. Now, I'm not a doctor, and this is an extreme generalization, but this is the concept. Your body has a reward system, and that reward system is the production of a chemical called dopamine. And as your body fulfills its life missions, it gets up in the morning, it goes to work, it has coffee, it watches its child hit a home run in a ball game, your body rewards itself by releasing a little bit of dopamine into your system. Well, what these opiates do is they pervert that system. They cause your dopamine receptors to release an unreasonably large amount of dopamine into your system. And when I say unreasonably large, let me give you an example. Well, let's use a metaphor. It's fall's coming, which means football, so I believe that a football metaphor would be appropriate. Imagine, if you will, having a nice meal at a restaurant. I believe that would be a dopamine equivalent of, let's say, a football. A sexual encounter may be the equivalent of a dopamine release of a football goalpost. Well, opiates in your system is an equivalent to a dopamine release of a football stadium. So that's what we're facing, and that's what we're up against. How do we attack that? How do we address that? Well, the side effect of someone afflicted with a substance use or opioid use disorder is the need to drug seek. The addict will stop at nothing to obtain the drug, which often results in them being justice involved. An addict will invariably steal to fuel the addict. And this addict's behavior, while it may seem irrational to you or to me, it isn't to the addict, because understand where that addict is. His or her mind is focused solely on one thing and one thing only, and that's to obtain the drug to get that dopamine release the size of a football stadium. So when you think of it through those lenses, you can kind of understand, maybe not, and appreciate why they do what they do, which involves theft. Someone with a substance use or opioid use disorder will steal. They'll steal from mom, they'll steal from dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, friends, anyone, and just about anything they can use to get that drug. And oftentimes it involves violence too, to obtain the drug. And once there's justice involved, what's the next step? Well, after disposition, in a courtroom of justice, a courtroom of punishment, well, incarceration. And of course, incarcerating a drug addict does nothing but buy time, because after the addict finishes his or her time, they go back out onto the street, and without treatment and without tools of recovery, they'll be back to the same drug-seeking behavior, and it becomes a revolving door. So what can you do about it? Well, some courts are forward-thinking, and they've developed what are called treatment or sobriety courts. And what these courts do is they convert a courtroom of justice and punishment to a courtroom of education, understanding, and compassion. And they do that using a couple of tools like I like to refer to as a left and a right. The left is treatment, the right is MAP. No, that's not my first name. It's an acronym. It stands for Medical Assisted Treatment. Back to the left. The left is treatment, and this is what's involved with treatment. Inpatient and outpatient intensive therapy, counseling, which could be individual or could be group, peer review, peer recovery meetings that takes the form of AA or NA meetings, almost daily drug testing, and then frequent meetings with the judge. And when I say frequent, once or twice a week. So that's the left. And on the right side, we have MAP. medical assisted treatment. And what that is, overseen by a doctor, not by a judge, is a drug fighting a drug. There are drugs that can shut down a dopamine's receptor's ability to dump out all this dopamine that I mentioned earlier. These drugs include Vivitrol, naltrexone, buprenorphine, and these drugs they're called opiate blockers. And so between the left and the right punch, we can give somebody afflicted with a substance use disorder or opioid use disorder the fighting chance that they deserve. So if you find that a loved one, could be a son or a daughter or somebody close to you, is justice involved and they have a opioid use disorder, ask about a treatment court. Inquire as to your loved one's eligibility. If they are eligible and if a treatment court is available, it could just as well turn a sentencing into a new beginning. Mom and Dad, this is Judge Stewart, and I know that your young one is busy and is involved, and you just don't think that your child is listening or pays attention to you. But what you got to understand is this: no matter how much your child is exposed to YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, or any other kind of social media exposure, the number one influencer for children is you. It's you. They watch you, they listen to you, and they copy you. Whether it looks like they do or they don't, they are. So keep that in mind.